A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar Hayim.
Shalom.
There are many streams and shades within the Jewish spectrum. Does the rabbi define himself as Orthodox?
Well, the difficulty with that question is, what does one mean by Orthodox? Many people understand the term Orthodox to mean fidelity to halacha, based on the words of Hazal and the Mishnah, the Talmud, etc., the Torah Ba'al Peh. And if that's what one means by Orthodox, then yes, certainly I'm Orthodox. I am entirely loyal to halacha, to halachic Judaism, in all realms of Jewish life. However, some people understand the term Orthodox to mean something which is fixed, entirely rigid, immutable, and essentially a very narrow and limited interpretation and expression of Jewish life and Torah study, something which grew up in Europe, in Central Europe, in reaction to Reformed Judaism, the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Before then, of course, there was no such concept, as there was no term that was used, namely Orthodox Judaism. This did not exist, this terminology. It was the advent of Reformed Judaism that forced those Jews who rejected what was going by the name Reform to label themselves by some other term, and they chose the term Orthodox. And some people understand, and I believe this is a mistake, that Orthodox Judaism means a Judaism which is an absolutely authentic reflection of Jewish existence and Jewish practice and Jewish customs in a certain time, in a certain place. Broadly speaking, today is based on, in many circles at least, on what was common standard practice in Central or Eastern Europe in the, shall we say, 18th century, early 19th century. That kind of Judaism, those forms of conduct, those liturgical customs, etc., those things became fixed and canonized, and in the minds of many, these things may never be changed. These things are immutable, they are impervious to any discussion of modification or evolution or reacting to the needs of the time, etc. And if that's what a person means by Orthodox Judaism, in that sense I am certainly not Orthodox. And I would like to point out that it's not only I who is not Orthodox in that sense. I would like to quote to you from Rav Saadia Gaon in his introduction to his Siddur, written approximately 1100 years ago. Rav Saadia Gaon was one of the greatest of the Jewish people's Torah scholars of all time, certainly over the last 1500 years. And he writes in this introduction to his Siddur that when it comes to matters of tefillah, for example, of prayer, the liturgy that we use in our prayers, this comes and has to come in two forms: a form and a style and a nusach, that is to say, a precise wording of those prayers that is used in one type of historical context, and another wording, another set of tefillot which are to be used in a different historical context. I'm quoting here from the Siddur of Rav Saadia Gaon, the introduction on page 10, Amud Yod. He begins by speaking about the whole concept of tefillah, and he explains that the nusach, the liturgy, the text that we use in our tefillot, is not to be found in the Tanakh. And when it comes to these questions, we rely on the traditions that we received from the prophets, from the Nevi'im, via their disciples, and Sheikh Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the Great Assembly, that is to say, the Chachamim, who existed at the beginning of the Second Temple period and in the following generations. And then he goes on to say, when it comes to tefillot and barachot, he writes, Samechu al ma shekibbelu ha'anashim b'mesorah minivi'ei Hashem. When it comes to tefillah, how we are to pray, what are we to say, in which fashion, in which order we say these things. Here we rely on the traditions of the Nevi'im, the prophets, وَهَيُّ لَهِمْ شَنَيْ سَدَرِيم, and they had two sets, or two forms, two formats, one could say, of tefillah. أَحَدْ لِزْمَنْ هَمَلُخَا, one for a period of time, an historical period, context where the Jewish people are independent in their own land. That's what he refers to as Zman HaMelucha, literally the time of kingship, of sovereignty. وَأَحَدْ لِزْمَنْ هَGَلُوث, and one for the period of the Galuth, when the Jewish people are not sovereign, when the Jewish people are scattered around the world. And therefore, it goes without saying, says Rav Saadia Gaon, the things that we pray for, the things that we focus on, and the way in which we speak about these things must, of course, differ between one historical reality and another historical reality. And on page 6 of the same introduction, he writes, and therefore, at a time when our forefathers lived in Eretz Yisrael and were all living together in their land, they did not need to say, he says, Lo hayu zekukim b'yamei avotenu lomar nekabes nidhei amo Yisrael. They did not need to say the bracha for ingathering the exiles of the Jewish people, because they were all in Eretz Yisrael. V'lo bonei Yerushalayim, they didn't have to say a bracha to rebuild Yerushalayim because it was built. Says Rav Saadia Gaon, mipnei she'hayta benuya, because it was already built. The point that Rav Saadia Gaon is making is really, of course, self-evident, and anyone who thought about these matters for one moment would immediately reach these conclusions. The thrust, therefore, of what Rav Saadia Gaon is saying is as follows: that nothing in Judaism, when it comes to the halachic modalities and the customs and the prayers and the style of prayers and the content of those prayers, etc., which make up our daily halachic Jewish practice and life, none of these things are impervious to the changes that are constantly going on around us. And when we shift from one historical context to another, inevitably these things must be taken into account. And therefore, if we speak about prayers nowadays, for example, it goes without saying that a Jew living in Eretz Yisrael cannot say, or should not say in his prayers, gather us together, including himself, so to speak, gather us all together from the four corners of the earth to Eretz Yisrael, when he himself is in Eretz Yisrael. So instead of saying, etc., to gather in our exiles from the four corners of the earth and bring us all together to Yerushalayim, something along those lines, that of course is a statement which cannot be said and must not be said in our current reality. If a Jew is living in Eretz Yisrael, what he should say instead is "V'chabes ahenu me'arba'ak nefot haaretz," or something to that words to that effect. In other words, gather in our brothers from across the globe, wherever they may be, to Eretz Yisrael. So even where one lives today on the globe should make a difference to how we daven, what we say, and what we focus on. So if we understand Orthodox Judaism to mean some form of traditional, immutable, and totally frozen form of Judaism, then Rav Saadia Gaon was not an Orthodox Jew. And I can also only be pleased to find myself following in his footsteps.
So how does the rabbi define himself?
For the reasons I just explained, I prefer the term halachic Judaism rather than Orthodox Judaism. Halachic Judaism refers to the fact that one is loyal to Chazal. By Chazal we refer to Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, who were the disciples of the latter-day prophets, the beginning of the Second Temple period. Anshe Knesset HaGedolah were the founders and the redactors of the oral tradition and those who passed it on to future generations, the Tanaim and later the Amoraim, these are the true source. These Chachamim, these people, are the true source of Torah wisdom, knowledge, authority, and authenticity. And their works, their teachings, their wisdom, their traditions are to be found in all the literature that we have from Chazal, from the Tanaim and the Amoraim, which includes some ancient midrashim, midrashei halacha, and which in essence are earlier than even the Mishnah, and the Mishnah, of course, and the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Talmud Bavli, the Tosefta, midrashei halacha v'agada, many different texts and sources that we have from that period. And as the Rambam explains in detail in his introduction to his great work Mishneh Torah, it is from all these works together that one can arrive at the correct conclusion and understanding as to what is right and wrong, what is permissible, what is prohibited, etc. in the Torah according to the Torah. It is these sources which all of Chachmei Yisrael, all of the wise men, all of the Torah scholars of Am Yisrael throughout the generations have strived to delve into, to understand, and to understand fully and deeply, I should add, and based on those studies reach conclusions that are appropriate for their time, for their reality, because all times and all realities, all historical contexts do have some impact on our lives, and therefore on how we must lead our lives according to the Torah, what we must do, what we must not do, what we must put an emphasis on, and what we can afford not to emphasize, etc. That is halachic Judaism. That does not imply a slavish and intransigent addiction, as it were, to the way things once were, whether it is 1, 2, 3, 5 or 10 generations ago. Not in any way is this the message of the Torah She'Ba'al Peh. The Torah She'Ba'al Peh, the oral tradition, has always taken into account all types of realities and changes in our reality, whether for the good or for the bad, whether it was a period of retreat and withdrawal in Am Yisrael's history, or there was a period of growth and development. And there's no question that at the present time in our history as a people, Am Yisrael today exists in a very different world, and the Jewish people today finds itself in a very different reality as a nation today as opposed to any other time in Jewish history, certainly for the last 2,500 years. The essential thrust of the Torah has always been that which was said to Am Yisrael before they received the Torah at Har Sinai: "Wa'atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim v'roy kadosh." You will be for me, for my purpose, a kingdom or a nation of priests and a holy people. And that is the essential message and divinely dictated and inspired purpose of the Jewish people on earth. And everything that we do, both as a nation and as individuals, must be directed towards that goal, to that purpose, as opposed to what the Jewish people for many generations have had to focus on, and that is simply surviving in a hostile environment as a scattered nation, without sovereignty, without connection to their land and to their language, etc. And all these things must play a part, and should and will play a part in all areas of Jewish life, including in the study of Torah and in the deciding of halacha.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.